Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. As we've reported here on Border Report Live, the lack of water in South Texas has forced ranchers and farmers to give up the important, crucial work their families have done for several generations in the Rio Grande Valley. The water shortage so bad that Texas's lone sugar mill and one of only 3 in the entire nation closed down, taking the $100 million it generates and nearly 500 jobs here in South Texas along with it. On today's edition, I'll be speaking with the Managing Director of the North American Development Bank, John Bekah, about a new advisory committee that will help oversee water projects on the Texas-Mexico border that will hopefully kickstart an economic revival for the borderlands agriculture industry. We'll also hear from our South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez live from Brownsville, Texas, as people speak out against the installation of buoy barriers in the Rio Grande, which Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced last month. And our El Paso correspondent Julian Rezendes will update us on a plan for Mexican nationals living here in the United States to elect their own representation in Mexico's lower house of Congress. But first, let's take a look at what else is trending across the border today. Starting with prosecutors saying that a grand jury has rejected indictments over the fatal shooting last year of a Texas man by a federal immigration agent during a traffic encounter. The Cameron County District Attorney's Office, which is Texas's southmost county, said Wednesday that they presented the case to a grand jury and the jurors did not bring charges. The shooting happened on March 15th of last year on South Padre Island. Officials say Ruben Ray Martinez of San Antonio drove toward officers managing traffic near a crash. DHS claims Martinez ran over an agent and that another agent fired to protect people. The passenger and lone witness to the shooting, Joshua Horta, disputed that account in a draft affidavit. Horta died Saturday in a car wreck in San Antonio, Texas. A federal judge ruled Wednesday that a Department of Homeland Security policy that allows immigration authorities to deport migrants to third countries that are not their own without first giving them notice or the opportunity to object is unlawful. U.S. District Judge Brian Murphy in Massachusetts sided with a group of non-citizens who filed a class action lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security last year. He ruled that the Trump administration's policy regarding third country removals must be set aside while giving the Trump administration 15 days to appeal. In a statement, DHS said the Trump administration, quote, has the constitutional authority to remove these criminal illegal aliens and clean up this national security nightmare. DHS must be allowed to execute its lawful authority and remove illegal aliens to a country willing to accept them, end quote. The White House also condemned the decision. A group of immigrant rights activists are holding a protest this afternoon opposed to the buoys that DHS plans to install in the Rio Grande, which is the river that separates Texas from Mexico. Our Sandra Sanchez is live along the river in Brownsville, Texas, to tell us more about the protest. Sandra.
Hi, Rudy. Yeah, I'm here at Alice Wilson Hope Park in Brownsville. You can see the border wall behind me. Now, we're about an hour early. The protesters are supposed to arrive at 3:30 Central Time. And what they're opposed to are these river buoys. You remember Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, brought us here at the early part of January and showed us the installation of the very first of these buoys. They're 15 feet long and they're 5 feet tall, and they're going in 265 miles of the Rio Grande throughout South Texas. That's drawing a lot of anger from a lot of people. The first buoys are starting here in Brownsville, about 1.5 miles from where I'm standing. We were taken to that spot. It is not open to the public. So these protesters, several different nonprofit organizations, have organized today to get together and meet at this park, which is public, and to express their outcry. Now, earlier today, I spoke to Elsa Hole of the No Border Wall Coalition. She says that they want more safeguards to protect the environment. They want a flood mitigation plan. They want to know how they'll be able to remove these waterborne barriers in case of very heavy rains. As you know, this region is prone to flooding. And they want to also have detailed information on the contracts. But here's the devil's in the details, because as you know, last summer, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem waived dozens of environmental regulations when it comes to putting in these waterborne barriers, and she said it's a matter of national security and it's her right to do so. So these people today want lawmakers to insist that the environmental considerations are met, but Noem is saying she doesn't have to. And in a statement to us, DHS a few months ago told us that the importance of these waterborne barriers is not only the safety of the agents, but those trying to illegally cross what can sometimes be a deadly river.
All right. Thank you so much, Sandra. We'll check out your report later tonight on borderreport.com. Sandra Sanchez joining us live from Brownsville with the latest on this protest against those border buoys announced by DHS last month. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you.
Moving on, more than a dozen Mexican nationals arrested during a raid of a used clothing business in South Texas last year have had their cases dismissed. In October, Homeland Security investigations raided 5 ropa usada warehouses, as they're called. That happened here in McAllen, Texas, about 30 miles from us here in Harlingen. Now, some of the employees allegedly entered the United States using tourist visas. Prosecutors charged them with visa fraud. A magistrate judge, however, disagreed with the government's interpretation of the law and dismissed those charges. So, prosecutors took the allegations to a grand jury, which indicted the ropa usada employees. A new proposal in Mexico would allow Mexican nationals living in the United States to elect their own representation in their Congress. Our Julian Resendiz joins us live from El Paso to explain how this plan would work. Hey, Julian.
Really good to be back. I can tell you there's a lot of excitement in the Mexican activist community in the United States. For a very long time, for decades, they have been active in trying to ensure a better way of life for the many Mexican immigrants who live in the United States. And up until now, their only resource has been to go to their local consulates. And sometimes, especially in some venues, there's been, rather than cooperation, some friction with the consulates. So the activists are really welcoming this proposal by the Mexican president to send a package of laws, a change to the electoral laws that would enable, for the first time, Mexicans living abroad to vote for their own representatives in the Mexican Congress. Ideally, they're looking for other migrants to represent their countrymen and countrywomen. And that's why they're calling this proposal the migrant deputies, the designation of migrant deputies. So far, the proposal contemplates electing Mexicans abroad, electing 8 representatives to Mexico's lower house of Congress. We still don't know many of the details of how this would be done, but we do know that for 5-6 years now, Mexicans abroad have had the capability of voting in their country's presidential election and recently in some of the gubernatorial election. How? By procuring voter identification cards from their local consulates. And the Mexican government wants to further this experiment and now extend that voting also to the Chamber of Deputies, the lower house of Congress, to elect these migrant representatives.
Now, when it comes to, passing something like this, does this have the support of the majority of people in government? What is the president saying about this?
Really, just as background, a few months back, there was a very controversial proposal championed by the president of Mexico to change the law so that members of the courts would be elected as opposed to just vetted and designated. And I can tell you that this proposal required constitutional changes, which were passed within a day on the strength of then President López Obrador and on the Morena party. The Morena party remains in power with a substantial majority. So my estimation is that if the president wants this has the votes to get passed. That's not to say there hasn't been some dissent, not from the Morena party, but from some of the parties allied to Morena. And that has to do not with the migrant deputies proposal, but with some funding and some formula proposals in which deputies are designated through the number of votes a party gets, kind of like in the second round, would have to be receive the most votes. Right now, a party pretty much decides which names or which people get appointed as they call it representative majority Congress people. But to answer your question, yes, it has a high possibility. Now, I also wanted to address something that was brought up to me by some of the advocates here in the United States, and that is that there is some concern that because Mexican populations are so concentrated in certain cities, Chicago, Los Angeles, Houston, for instance, there's the concern that maybe that's where all the migrant deputies will come from. And what about who's going to really speak up for Mexicans in southern Arizona, here in El Paso and southern New Mexico? So they're hoping that the Mexican government, through its consulates, will hold hearings so that migrants can have a voice in how they will be represented in the Mexican Congress. One proposal that's been floating is, why don't we have electoral districts like they have in Mexico, here in the U.S. and in Europe and elsewhere in the world where Mexicans reside? That way we can make sure that people in a certain region will have someone directly to go to advocate for them. Now, as far as what they want advocated in the Mexican Congress, two proposals are coming clear from my speaking with activists. One is healthcare. Right now, especially among the undocumented Mexican community, you work hard all your life here in the U.S., you pay certain taxes, but because you are not documented, you cannot expect Social Security. What they want is for the Mexican government, for someone to propose in Mexico, well, you worked in the U.S., maybe you didn't pay taxes to us, but you send remittances. So you will be eligible for Mexican Social Security and all those benefits. That's one thing they're advocating. The other thing they're advocating is they want a stronger voice from their community so that the Mexican government can be more forceful with the U.S. when it comes to immigration. I know that President Sheinbaum, we've reported, is between a rock and a hard place when it comes to dealing with the Trump administration. But for the Mexicans living here in the U.S. Who feel that they're under siege from immigration authorities, perhaps because of their status, perhaps because of their looks, they want those deputies to advocate with the Mexican government. Don't give in. Fight for us.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Julian. We appreciate you joining us today. Definitely an interesting proposal, and I look forward to seeing where your reporting goes with this one.
Absolutely.
To read more on Julian or Sandra's stories or any of the other stories that you see here on Border Report Live, remember, 24/7. You can visit borderreport.com for more. We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll be speaking with John Bekah, the Managing Director for the North American Development Bank, about the bank's new Water Resiliency Fund, aiming to conserve and diversify water supply sources in the Texas-Mexico borderlands. Stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Border Report Live. Recently, the North American Development Bank announced a new water resiliency fund, part of a $400 million in financing for priority infrastructure projects aimed at conserving and diversifying water supply sources in the U.S.-Mexico borderlands, as well as an announcement just last week on a committee of local stakeholders to oversee the management of those projects. Here to speak with us more about it is NAD Bank Managing Director John Bekah. Thanks for joining us again today, sir.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's start off with the advisory committee that was announced last week. It was set up for the RGV water management study to help oversee water projects here on the South Texas border. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. This began a working collaboration with the Rio Grande Valley counties and the judges of each of those counties, Hidalgo, Cameron, Willacy, and Star, with an effort to try to help them respond to the water emergency that was declared by the judges back in 2024. And one of the things we proposed in talking with them was the need to do two things. One, begin to conserve more water, and the second is to find more water to augment the decreasing flows from the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo. So that the purpose of this steering committee is to help come up with common solutions for a common problem that's shared throughout the four counties. And part of that will require investing in new infrastructure, in new projects, in new sources of water, which will come as a result of some of this coordination.
Now, you mentioned both conservation and finding new sources. Which one is more important, conservation or diversification?
I think our view is it's an and. We've got to do both. We believe we're happy to talk a little bit about the resiliency fund, what we're doing in the Rio Grande Valley. Mm-hmm. The easiest the new water to find is the water we're wasting. So in a lot of ways, what we propose to do as a starting point is to recover the water that is being lost through evaporation, leakage, or just inefficient usage, both by municipalities and agriculture. But that we know that's not going to be sufficient, and we need to find new sources of water that can include desalination, which I know several communities in the Rio Grande Valley are trying to undertake, as well as reusing water many times before you actually deposit it back into nature, which will eventually end up in the ocean down in the Rio Grande Valley. So there's a couple of new ideas, new technology to try to find new sources in addition to conserving and recovering wasted water.
You know, speaking of that water resiliency fund, last time you were on the program, we talked a little bit about it, $400 million in financing for that fund. How have applications been coming in, and have any projects begun?
Sure. Applications has been very robust. We started out in the Rio Grande Valley, specifically targeting the irrigation districts, which effectively serve as the backbone for water distribution throughout the Rio Grande Valley. And they had some very significant water loss rates. And we just closed the window for application processes back earlier this month. And we received 21 project proposals from 13 different irrigation districts, identifying and requesting a total of $225 million in total financing to support the investment. These are really practical investments, things like lining irrigation canals, changing canals to tubes, improving pump stations, things to make sure that water losses that can be up over 50%, meaning you start at the beginning of the system, 100, and by the time you get to the end of the system, you only got 50% of what you started with, can be very high. So we want to lower that rate. Our initial estimates, we're still conducting our analysis, but our initial analysis shows that these projects could save, in water terms, 55,000 acre feet of water. Now, what does that mean to the average person in the Rio Grande Valley is that translates into almost 50 million gallons a day of water savings. That's enough to serve the 600,000 residents of the Rio Grande Valley. So just by investing in not losing water, we found enough water for 600,000 residents per day. We think that's significant.
Yeah, that's an incredible amount. I mean, that's more than the population of, I think, Cameron and I want to say Starr counties combined right there, which is half the Rio Grande Valley when we're talking those numbers. You know, going into the diversification and other things, one of the things that is always coming up whenever we talk about it with the local residents here in the Rio Grande Valley when we're talking water problems is, why don't we build a desalination plant? Is that really a viable tool?
Yeah, I think it's a viable tool depending on the circumstance and the particularities. I think there's two big challenges with desalination. Really three, but I'll say them two. One is they're expensive. They're expensive to build and they're expensive to operate. So effectively, desalinized water is the most expensive water. In and of itself, it's not sufficient, or it's going to be too costly for ratepayers to actually want to invest in that. However, it can work effectively as an augmentation within the water supply of a given community or a region. El Paso out west, where Julian just reported from, that's exactly what they do. They take brackish water and mix it about 10 to 15% of their water distribution. So it can be a solution here within within the Rio Grande Valley. And the other is is the environmental risks, meaning what do you do with the very concentrated water that's left over that has a very high salinity to it. So disposing or injecting that water back into an environment where it's not going to cause harm to the soil or other water supplies and water tables is an important consideration that can also limit the applicability. So in a nutshell, it's a tool in the toolbox, but it's one that has to be thought out because it's expensive.
The last time you were on the program, you mentioned the Water Resiliency Fund as a strategic investment in our shared binational future, referencing Mexico there. Kind of moving out to the far west portion of the border, pollution is really plaguing Southern California. How is NADBank getting involved there?
Well, pollution is a common problem throughout the world, but in particular in the border region. In Tijuana specifically, they have an acute and chronic problem with what is sadly a collapse of the water treatment system within Tijuana several years ago. And both the United States at the federal level and the Mexicans at the federal level, as well as the state of Baja California, have been working hard with the bank to try to identify and pull in or leverage different resources to attend to the overall problem. What does that problem entail? Is basically sewer lines are collapsed so untreated water can go into either the ocean or the Tijuana River. Second, there isn't enough capacity to treat sewage water, so therefore overflows get discharged back into those two different bodies. In addition, there's also a lack of just plain potable water throughout Tijuana that needs to be addressed, and so there's an opportunity there to see how we can take this water and use it better to augment the overall water resources. So that's the big nutshell, the big picture, if you will, of what we're trying to do in Tijuana. Specifically, there are 22 projects that both countries and stakeholders have identified, and I'm pleased to state that 7 of those have been completed. Importantly is the reconstruction and putting in operation a wastewater treatment plant called San Antonio de los Buenos, which had been completely inoperational for several years. That is now rebuilt, operating since last year, so it's beginning to treat some of those waters. We've also done a lot of work with the local municipality to replace pump stations that would often collapse, causing overflows into those water bodies, as well as finding new collectors and sewer lines that will actually make sure that the water doesn't seep out into the soil and into those water bodies. So those are the main things we're doing. That cost has been over 66. Well, let me get my numbers straight. We've channeled 32 million US from the EPA money into some of these projects, and Mexican government has put in about 60 million into these projects.
All right. We've been speaking with NADBank Managing Director John Bekah today. Unfortunately, we are out of time today, sir. It feels like this is what happened last time. We could have gone on for another hour, but we appreciate you being on the program once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick break, but stay with us. We've got a few more headlines for you when we return. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Border Report Live. Following up on a story we told you about on yesterday's edition, despite growing calls from some community members to end a contract allowing ICE agents to use the police department's firing range, the Escondido City Council has decided to keep that contract in place. We told you how residents of the Southern California city were upset federal agents were being allowed to use that gun range. Dozens of angry community members booed the council's decision Wednesday night after a motion to end the contract failed to garner support from most of the council. The move came after council heard from nearly 200 people during public comment, most of which were against the contract. In Brownsville, Texas, and Matamoros, Tamaulipas, Mexico, thousands of people will be celebrating the annual Charo Days Festival. It's a nearly century-old celebration of culture and history between our two border cities. Valley Baptist Medical Center in Brownsville decided to dress all its newborns in tiny Mexican outfits in honor of the celebration. Some babies are wearing colorful bows and carrying maracas, while others have ones like a mariachi. Really quick, before we go, we wanted to remind you that you can stay informed on the stories shaping the U.S.-Mexico border as Border Report Live brings you real-time updates, expert insights, and voices from both sides of the border in podcast form. You can find our show on any of the apps you see there at the bottom of your screen. That's going to do it for us today. For Sandra Sanchez and Julian Resendiz, my name's Rudy Mireles. We'll see you next time.